everyone. My name is Rose Daniel. I'm the Technical Manager with APAL. Welcome to today's Spring Future Orchards Walk. Today's session is streaming to Stanthorpe, Batlow, Orange, Bilpin and the Goulburn Valley and will run for about 2 hours. We're disappointed that we can't be there with you in person, but we do have a great lineup of speakers and panel members who will share and discuss ideas on how to maintain productivity and profit margins under the current pandemic conditions, updates on the labour situation in Australia, tools to assist management decisions under a range of labour supply scenarios, tips and ideas on what they are doing to attract, retain, protect and maximise the performance of their workforce. In addition, the frontline advisors from Orange, Batlow and the Goulburn Valley will share the results from their trials. Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce Jeremy Griffith, Head of Government Relations and Advocacy at APAL. He works closely with growers to advocate their priorities to government and relevant authorities. Jeremy will provide an update of the current labour situation for the industry. Jeremy, it's now my pleasure to hand over to you.
Thanks, Rosie. Hi, everybody. Look, obviously the focus of today's Orchard Walk is really the concern over the lack of labour. In simple terms, as everybody's very clearly aware, there's a significant concern right across Australia due to the lack of fewer backpackers and seasonal worker program workers. In short, the numbers are, last year there would have been something like 140,000 odd backpackers. We're down to, as of June, 86,000, and this is decreasing at a rate of about 8% per month. So this number is coming south. There are absolutely no other backpackers coming to the country. Seasonal work program peaked last year about 12,000. It's currently down to 8,000. There are a lot of seasonal work program people who've been in the country for an extended period of time who are actually looking to get home. So, and any additional programs who bring them in are going to be very limited. I think the Northern Territory last time brought in something like 175 people. So that isn't going to be resolve too many of the issues, but it's a start at least. Western Australia reports at this current time that they have literally half the amount of backpackers in the state as they did last year. So it's a huge level of concern because a lot of growers, as we know, are very, very heavily reliant upon backpackers and the visa holders to pick their crop. And also, obviously, there's no visa applications are lodged in near zero, so there's literally nobody coming into the country. This is made worse by very restricted border conditions, particularly in Queensland, particularly in Western Australia, particularly in the New South Wales-Victoria border. And these things, whilst there's a lot of work going on in the background, there doesn't seem to be a lot of change in the very short term. The reality is, the government is not going to be able to fix this problem. They're not going to be able to significantly increase the amount of backpackers coming to the country, and they're not going to be able to significantly increase the amount of seasonal workers coming into this country. And so this is a major concern for the industry. On top of that, despite strong lobbying from the industry to government say, hey, look, we need to bring a lot more people into the country, governments of all, state and federal, are very focused on leveraging domestic unemployed labour. Much to the frustration of many growers saying, look, we've done that, we've been in the situation before. We have a lot of issues of actually attracting Australian workers to come to regional areas and to pick crops, but the governments are very committed on it, and I can understand why. It's very hard to use government money or funding or taxpayers' money to provide incentives for overseas workers to come and pick crops in a state where we have high levels of unemployment. So in short, the government is not going to have a silver bullet to this issue. They're not going to fix this problem in the short term. There will not be a significant shift in backpackers or seasonal worker programs coming to the country. Therefore, there's going to be a lot of need for pre-planning by the growers. The message is getting through, at least everybody's talking about it. The fact that it's a priority for today's Zoom meeting. And people looking at ways of making it more attractive, better accommodation, improved pastoral care, which is very important. And I think that'll be a key theme coming out of today's session. One thing I will frame as well, very, very important to keep in the background, particularly having dealt with government a lot on this issue, is making sure that each grower has a very effective COVID management plan put in place. You cannot give lip service to this process, because if you are found to have COVID on your thing and you do not have a effective system for tracking your workers who's been on and off your program, or you haven't been separating the workers, the government will give you absolutely no favors. And so it's very, very important. And in addition, whilst we're trying to attract local workers to come into the regions, there is an extraordinarily increased level of scrutiny, particularly from the media, on the treatment regarding to poor or exploitative work environments. And this will continue to be a major focus over the next couple of months. So basically the government and the media have said industry is on notice, and we need to be very conscious about how we manage that process going forward. So whole lot of good speakers today to go through some of the practical things that we can do from an industry point of view to hopefully address some of these concerns going forward. Happy to take any questions. I'm joining the panel a bit later on. And just on a side issue, Rosie's asked me to briefly mention an update on the National Netting Program. Just for quick awareness, a lot of the state governments that currently have guidelines that have been issued by the federal government, which they are working with industry associations prior to actually releasing. They've released the South Australian guidelines. We know Queensland has got the guidelines and working on at the moment. Victoria's doing the same. We haven't heard anything out of New South Wales. So hopefully over the next couple of weeks, there should be some positive feedback on when and how the growers can apply for these national netting programs. So that's a side issue, and I'm happy to take questions separately to that one. Thanks, Rosie.
Thanks very much, Jeremy. As Jeremy mentioned, he'll be part of the panel later. So if you've got any questions for him, you can type them in now already to the Q&A function, and we'll address those during the panel session. I'd now like to invite Ross and Craig onto the screen. I'm sure most of you know Ross and Craig very well, but just in case, Ross Wilson is a founding member of Ag First in New Zealand and brings over 30 years horticultural experience to the business. Ross is the key driver of APAL's Future Orchards program, ensuring that the latest technical advances and good tree management techniques make it to the hands of growers. Craig Hornblow has been working with the horticultural industry for over 30 years and with Ag First since 1995. He regularly provides advice to clients on financial planning and monitoring, training and management, field research and new technology in production systems and fruit quality, and on purchase feasibilities. So Ross and Craig will now present options for managing your orchard in a global pandemic. Over to you, Ross and Craig.
Thanks, Rose. Yeah, I'll kick off. Ross and I'll do a bit of a Laurel and Hardy, as we tried to describe it yesterday, and we'll just cut in and out across the presentation as we go through. Jeremy outlined, you know, it could be pretty tough times for a few of us, and talking across Australia with a range of growers, there's actually a range of perception about how the labour situation is going to unfold, and some feel very comfortable and others feel that it's going to be a very big issue. And the one thing that's for sure is this is a fast moving virus and anything can happen. So someone who feels quite comfortable today could be considerably under pressure in a few months' time. So in essence, it's really important to have a really good plan and work through a strategy in terms of how we can actually, for want of a better word, pivot through our business through a changing time. Next slide, Ross.
I think before we go on to the next slide, Craig, we've got our first poll question, if Larissa could put it up. And it's to give us an idea of the audience out there, what they're actually feeling about the season ahead with the global pandemic we're in. So we've got four answers ranging from you're not worried through to, you know, really worried. So I'd be just interested for you to make your vote for those that are online, for the groups, maybe make a general vote, and we'll just see where the audience is feeling about the current situation. So there we go. What that's showing me. So of the Northern Loop, we've got a range with, you know, most people either slightly worried, 50-50 between slightly worried and really worried. So that's a pretty good summary. At least you're not the very worst scenario. So we're going to try and give you some, you know, some management things that you can really look at changing that might help you manage through what's looking like a pretty difficult scenario. All right, got to use my arrow. Here we go, Craig.
Thanks, Ross. So in a typical orchard, if you look at it, we're spending 800 to 1,000 hours a hectare. And if we spread that over a 12-month period, that's what the Manhattan looks like. You know, through the winter, we've got a pretty level playing field. And as we come into manual thinning, November, December, January, February, there's this build up in the Manhattan. And as we go through harvest, depending on the variety mix we have, the Manhattan gets even steeper. So what we've got to try and do is think about in a planning process is how can we flatten this off, or how can we spread it into windows of lower demand. And what we want to go through today is sort of a structured approach, a systematic way of planning through this and looking for opportunities to actually take the pressure off while maintaining a strong business model and financial result. Ross.
Okay, so yeah, as Craig mentioned, we're gonna jump between slides. So dual presentation here. My first slide shows you what we're calling the Ag First Labour decision tree. The decision tree is out to the right. It's too small for you to read on the screen, but we've designed it, and the old background's not allowing me to show it to you, but it's on the website. And it's a series of questions with some management responses that you might consider to manage the issue. So please take advantage of that decision tree. Ag First have put a lot of thought into it, trying to think of all the things that you can do proactively to manage this labour crisis. And today in our presentation, we're going to go through the 7 decisions that you see on the main table. First off, we're going to ask, what is your labour demand and supply situation? We're then going to ask, should this be the year that you invest in labour assist technologies? Are you in a severe enough situation that you should consider removing or juicing some blocks that will reduce the labour component of your orchard? Most people will say that reducing your hand thinning load would help. As Jeremy's mentioned, the situation for thinning labour looks really, really grim. And let's hope that this virus allows our borders to open come harvest so that we've actually got more people to harvest the crop. But for thinning, it's looking really grim. We're going to look at how we can extend the hand thinning period, how we take the peaks, or how we could take the peaks out of your harvest Manhattan that Craig described, and being ready, being proactive to, if you need to actually reduce the number of picks. So those are the things that we're going to cover in the presentation today. So the first thing that we recommend is that you do some good work, some good calculations on actually predicting your labour demand. And for those of you that have very stable orchards, you know, the planted area and the variety mix is not changing dramatically, it might be simple enough because you know what it's been before. But for those of you that have had major changes to your orchard business, that have pulled out some blocks, that might have bought the neighbour's block, you know, you really need to know and understand, we think, this year in particular, with quite some detail, when you need people, how many people you need, and in which ISO week you need them. We've developed some tools. One of them is on OrchardNet. So those of you that use OrchardNet can access this tool, which will help you make those calculations. We also strongly suggest that there's no, and I'm sure all the people that are on this Zoom today, there's none of you that we could describe as the ostrich with the head in the sand, because that's absolutely the wrong thing to do. You need to be out there talking to your labour supply partners, whoever they may be. You need to identify what your labour situation is, because once you know that, then the planning starts. You know, I'm a grower myself. This has given me sleepless nights already. My seasonal labour from the Pacific Islands, historically the last 2 years, has been 12 people for thinning and harvest. I need about 16 in total. This year, I've got 4 out of 12. So that means I've got to find ways to either find those other 8 or actually reduce my labour demand. And then we ask the question, so if your standard labour pools are short, think about what other labour pools you can access. There are recently unemployed Australians. The Australian tourism and hospitality sector has suffered much worse than we have in the fruit growing industry. There are people that need work. So it's up to us as growers to make our work as attractive and as easy for those people to do, and then we need to recruit them. So here's just a couple of screenshots, one of the labour planner. We're going to use what we've developed up as the model orchard. So you'll be aware that with the Future Orchards program, one of the things we do is develop up this Australian model orchard. And it's a great model to be able to manipulate and look at scenarios just like we've got this year with this labour shortage. This is this particular model orchard, as you'll see, it's 40 hectares planted. It's projected to pick 1.9 million kilos. We know that the average rate of thinning in Australia, based on the monitoring, is 300 kilos. This is harvested kilos of fruit thinned per person per hour. So this particular orchard requires 6,400 thereabouts of thinning time. And if we assume a thinning season starting mid-November through to mid-January, we need 56 days of thinning. At 5 days a week, that's 20 thinners. At 6 days a week, that's 17 thinners. This tool is available on OrchardNet if you want to use it. Same
Ross, sorry, Ross, can I just cut in on that one?
Sure.
Ross and I sort of debated this 300 kilos per person per hour. And, you know, I rattle off and I say, look, thinning's 250 to 300 hours a hectare. But if you're looking at the detailed planning that we need to do, you need to also break this down on a block by block basis and look at it. And if I've got a block that's a young block only doing 30 tonnes, it's got a different requirement from my best pick lady block doing 85 or 90. So that's why Ross has come back and analysed the same data set, but come up with this 300 kilo number, which just gives us a little bit more accuracy about how we spread that labour across a range of performance levels within our business.
Okay, so similarly with harvest, this is the Manhattan of labour demand for this model orchard by ISO week. And you can see two very big peaks. One around the time that the gala and pear harvest is occurring, and one big peak when the majority of the pinks and the Granny Smith and the Fuji are being harvested. And that is quite a difficult scenario to manage. And in this year, we need to try and manage it as best we can. How can we reduce the peaks and fill in the troughs? But knowing what this is and then being able to come up with a plan of how you manage these peaks, we're suggesting is part of the planning that needs to happen. And with these new labour pools, they are different. They won't be as productive as the seasonal workers that come in from the islands. You know, what is the right recruitment process to get them on your land? What do you have to accommodate them? Real life situation. We've built accommodation for our RSE workers on my own orchard. Now we're having to buy caravans for potentially the young people that are likely to come out of our cities because we can't put them in the same accommodation. So that's what we're doing. My wife today is going out to look at caravans. They've got to be trained differently. They've got to be supervised differently. They will need to be motivated. You know, Australians living in your country have a different mode of what they need versus the backpacker or the seasonal worker that's just here to work. And then we ask the question, you know, in reality, and let's talk about platform assist in more detail when we get to it, because I think it's my next slide. So the next decision we ask you to make on our labour decision tree is this the year? Is 2020 the year to invest in labour assist technologies. We are looking at a more diverse workforce than we've had before. I remember going to Italy and there were platforms on every orchard. Why was that? It was because in Italy, they wanted the whole family to be able to pick the crop, including grandma and granddad. And those people can pick on a platform, they can't pick up a ladder and a 20-kilo bucket. So, you know, do we need to look at these technologies, not maybe to pick more bins per hour, but just to allow a greater diversity of the Australian public to be able to work on our orchards? And an example, I've got hydro ladders on my own orchard, 3 of them, that we actually put in the shed over harvest. We don't actually like them. But this year, do I need to bring those back out, put some good pickers on those and get less able pickers just on short ladders or just picking bottoms? You know, these are the sorts of things to consider. And the next slide, Craig, I'll let you talk about this one.
Sure. So platform experience, you know, one of the things we do know is it's physically reducing the workload. So, you know, people aren't always carrying fruit. So, you know, at the end of the day, they haven't lugged around a couple of tons of apples on their shoulder. They've actually just been placing it into a conveyor belt or something else. So the workload's easier. So that gives a chance to extend hours. And there's a number of people with platforms might go from 7.5 to 8 to 9 to 10 hours for a workday. So that's one thing. And then the other one is actually just now with the efficiency of LED lights and things and the accuracy of the colouring of those lights and getting it matched with fruit colour, then you've got a great chance to actually extend the hours even further. So I've got a couple of clients who will actually look at extending their work hours at thinning and definitely have light options through harvest, which we've been doing for a couple of years now as well. The different demographic in terms of, Ross mentioned that whole workload issue as well, and sort of what does that open up for the people on those platforms? The experience says to me that working with growers, that there's a range of staff who can't manage the ladder day after day and week after week, and that physical nature of going up and down. But instead of actually sending them down the road, they've actually put those sort of people onto their platforms. They're probably not getting an increase in output, but they're actually maintaining that workforce, reducing the turnover and maintaining that investment in the training they've put into those people by putting them into on a platform. You know, platforms are really capital intensive. So why have we put this up as right at the top of our decision tree? Because you've got to make these decisions early, and you just can't rock down to the local dealership and grab a platform. So you're going to make that decision quite quickly. And to make the most of these machines, you've got to work them longer. You've got to actually have great horticultural skills in terms of presenting fruit right through the canopy to the platform and making sure they're as efficient as they can be. It's not all, a bed of roses, or when you grab a platform. Last year, a client of mine invested $250,000 in platforms, went out there, used them a little bit over pruning and thinning, and then got to picking. And I walked out and they were 20 meters down the row, parked up. It was a nightmare. The crew wasn't working. They walked away from it and came back 4 days later, just wanted a full reset. You've got to put a lot of thinking about platforms. It's a different sort of person. You've got to have a pilot on that machine. You've got to have someone who's got an overview, checking speed, shifting people's location, all that sort of. Having someone on the machines that's got the responsibility to drive that productivity is really important. The other thing is, it's a big change, is this motivation, supervision, management of people. That we've had conversations on one-to-one as we go across the orchard. There's one person, one bin, one ladder. It might be a bin trailer with 2 people, but now you've actually got to manage 6 people, and that can be positive and negative. that slowest person on the platform can grind the whole thing to a halt. But if they work really effectively together and they have a bonus system or a strategy as a team, they can actually pick up someone who's less motivated during the day and drag them through and keep the whole momentum going. But it's a different set of skills than just what we've traditionally seen from our supervisors. So there's real positives, but there's a lot of learnings to build into that to make it happen.
Okay, so kindly supplied by Jason Shields at Plucking Orchard. We've got an image of what what your orchard might look like, maybe this year, maybe in the future, but certainly well worth considering. So just a little video for you to watch, 42-second video. Okay, so platforms and what they might do to be able to work with a greater demographic of people, well worth considering if you've got orchards that are suitable. The next decision we want to move on to is also quite a major one. Platforms are not cheap, but this is also a fairly major decision, and this will depend on where you're at, what your labour supply is looking like, and what your aversion to risk is. And we're actually asking the questions, is it right for you to actually consider removing some blocks or juicing some blocks in this particular season? And for you to make this sort of very major decision, we suggest that you need to know the economic margins of each of your blocks. Think about whether it's worth removing those low margin blocks that were set to come out in the next 1 to 3 years anyway, and with a labour pandemic in front of you, it is worth bringing that decision forward. And I've tried to get some feedback from around the country about what the opportunities are for juice. It appears that in some states there is some good opportunity, but obviously growing these marginal blocks that are marginal for fresh market, maybe this year the right thing is to grow them for juice. Not to take the block out if it's got good long-term potential, but to eliminate, with juice we can eliminate the hand thinning need, and we can harvest as labour allows rather than having to harvest to a strict maturity window. And remember that big Manhattan that we showed you before. Imagine if there's some blocks at the peak of that Manhattan that you can shift out of that peak and actually pick them in a slot that suits you rather than suits the maturity of the crop. When we talk about the economic margins of a block, what we've done here is we've modelled up this this model orchard of Australia here. It's a 40-hectare model. It has a range of plantings of a range of varieties, and it has some different, that like we've got some good grannies and we've got some poor grannies. We've got some low yielding pinks and we've got some good yielding pinks. Same with Rural Gala down here. And what we'd suggest is, and what this is the case with every orchard that we study, there's quite a healthy bottom line, $660,000 profit. But when you actually analyze the business, there's some very good blocks that are making good money. The best one being this block of Rosy Glow here, $55,000 a hectare. But there's also some quite poor ones. The standard Fuji making a small loss, the low yielding grannies making a fairly big loss, the Peckhams not making a lot of money, the low yielding Rural Gala not making a lot of money. And we modeled what if you took out that standard Fuji block, that poor yielding Granny Smith block, the low yielding pinks and the low yielding gala. Take them out. It's 7 hectares out of the 40 that are just going to be grass or mustard ready for the next crop. But it doesn't actually do much to the bottom line of the business. You're not actually making a lot less money. You're just taking the parts out of the business that are not making a good contribution to overheads. And surprise, surprise, there's quite a significant labour saving and the ability for you to move those peaks. So really worth considering if you're really worried about the season going forward. The next question we ask, and I think most people answer this one definitely yes, is would reducing the hand thinning load help? This is possibly another good time to bring in our second poll question, Rose. And the question is, what proportion of your thinning and harvest labour do you currently have confirmed? With thinning now, 6 weeks, 8 weeks away for the Goulburn Valley, it's only 6 weeks away potentially. What proportion of the labour that you need do you currently have confirmed, ranging from none through to 100%? Be interesting to see how we answer that question. Okay, so while you're answering that, we asked the question we're now talking about hand thinning. How do we reduce the hand thinning crop load? We're suggesting the first thing we need to do is to make sure the 2020 chemical thinning is the best chemical thinning you have ever achieved. We're going to ask the question of whether there's sunblocks on your orchard, whether an aggressive chemical thinning approach is the right way to go. Another thing to consider this year is this year the year to remove crop from young trees and put the energy that would have gone into crop into actually growing the tree. So there we have the result of our poll in, where we've got 20% of the audience out there at this stage don't have any labour confirmed. 25%, another 20%, only 25%. And only 7% of the audience have 100% confirmed. That's a serious scenario we find ourselves in. That's the state, that's where you're all thinking. That shows us that the audience is, has got a problem in front of us, just like we have here in New Zealand. Both countries are looking at very, very similar issues. So this becomes important. I go on to say, if we're going to go ahead with an aggressive chemical thinning strategy, be careful you don't over thin the money blocks. That rosy glow block that's making a significant contribution to the bottom line. There's be nothing worse than only having 70 to 80% of a crop on that block. That's a money block. Don't risk over thinning the varieties that are prone to biennial bearing or pit. We don't want to turn a 1-year labour crisis problem into a 2-year problem and throw our blocks into biennial bearing, or create a pit problem in Kansi and Jazz. And if we do manage to aggressively thin, the worst thing that can happen is that our trees take off with excess vigour. So be ready if that happens, that you've got your vigour control strategies in place. As I mentioned, chemical thinning, it's an art. There are so many variables that come into it, and there are so many decisions to make. There's not many growers out there that are confident to make all the decisions themselves. A second opinion or a third opinion is often sought, and get the right advice, it can make a big difference. So I've got a little analogy here. In 2020, the artwork needs to be perfection. If the version of Mona Lisa on the left is what you've achieved with your chemical thinning in the last decade, what you've got to achieve in 2020 is the version on the right. Let's aim for it to be as good as it possibly can be. We've got to get it right on all blocks. There's no room for grossly under thinning and having massive hand thinning jobs this season. So where you've had that before, make sure the strategy avoids that at all cost. There will be some blocks that it's worth the chemical thinning, taking the punt, taking the risk that they might end up at only 80 to 100% of the original target. They will be probably blocks that pay premiums for size and colour. They're not prone to pit and blotch. And, you know, for an example, the standard Royal Gala. So this is the standard Royal Gala block that's on that model orchard. It's got a yield under normal scenarios of 47 tonnes per hectare, 80% pack out. You know, half the fruit is of high grade colour standard, half of it's standard grade colour. There's our cost to pack it, there's our cost to grow it, including about $4,700, or probably about the 300 hours per hectare to thin it. And it has a bottom line of 21. So let's assume that that block, if we're going to aggressively thin that block, we're going to potentially take it below the 47 tonne. Okay, 47 might become 40 tonne. We're not going to change the pack out probably, but we're going to change the size. We're going to lift it from a 150 gram piece to a 170 gram piece because we're thinning it hard and we're thinning it early. And if we can control vigor, we'll get a lift. We will get a lift in size. And if you believe the outcomes that I've got, that the increased size and the increased colour will make the product that we grow more value per kilo, then the bottom line is actually still very attractive. And if that's the scenario that's real for you, then that would make sense to aggressively thin a block like that. Craig.
So, you know, if we need to try and get our art skills up a little bit better and try and, I don't think I'll ever be able to paint. I'm very much a stick figure person, not someone who paints Mona Lisa, but if we need to get better at what we're doing, we need to develop a really structured plan well ahead of time. You know, I spend probably 50% of my time right now and through September and October just going through our chemical thinning plans and laying everything out in a lot of detail. So we're very clear, and within the business, we're very clear about what we're trying to achieve. And we're looking at the learnings and changes. So have a very detailed block by block plan in what we're doing and what you need to do. Ross? One of the things in chemical thinning, when we try and compare notes and try and understand what someone else is doing, and we need a great understanding of the tools we've got, we also need to understand the differences between regions and sub-regions and that sort of thing. And just here's an example where tools are, you know, that a tool could be really valuable in Shepparton, but not that useful in Tasmania. When you look at Tasmania, you know, over a 4-week period in October, you might be thinning. Only 12 days last year were above 18 degrees, and only 9 of those actually converted to days above 20. So to pick a really warm window is really difficult. In Shepparton, last year, 27 days of that month went above 18, and 25 of those converted to above 20. So really a lot easier chance of picking a really good weather window for our traditional chemistry. Ross? So we've got our traditional chemistries, ATS, Carbaryl, Estral, BA, and we should know all of these chemistries pretty well. But what I struggle to think about is if I need to get a lot, if I need to increase my thinning and try and get a much better result, these chemistries are not necessarily rate related, or I'm already at the maximum use, or I've got to do multiple applications or some other strategy. And so what I want to do now is just talk a little bit about a new chemistry which gives us a greater opportunity. So just next slide, Ross. So if we look at metamitron, you know, I think it's a game changer in what we're doing. And this is just some of the data that we produced in New Zealand, but in Australia and Europe and other countries, they produce something similar. A high rate of metamitron, increasing the thinning effect. And so you've got a real linear relationship. which gives us a greater opportunity that if we need to up game or actually remove most of the fruit off the block, we've got a greater and greater chance with a chemistry like metamitron that's not as temperature sensitive or stage dependent compared to our other chemistries. Ross? So like I said, that metamitron's not as temperature dependent and not as size dependent as the other chemistry. So it's giving us greater flexibility and probably greater predictability. So we have this wide window. Drying time's important for sure. And because it can be really effective and it's a photosynthetic inhibitor, then we've got to be careful not to overspray the bottoms. But when you compare it with other chemistries, it effectively does the same sort of thing, that the bottoms are always the piece that I can potentially overthin, and I need to focus on how I thin tops and reduce the workload in the tops of my trees. Ross? So with metamitron, one of the things about this drying time and the ability to have a wide window is actually you don't need to be driven hard to just spray on a particular weather window. We've got a wide use pattern over the week, so I can just do it in good drying conditions, start early, finish early, get really good drying, get good absorption, and it just changes the way I'm thinking about chemical thinning. And I find a number of growers who are using metamitron are less stressed, and it's more relaxing period of time because you're not driven hard to predict the weather and actually understand it absolutely. Probably one of the downside is this whole thing around warm nights and shade, because it's a photosynthetic suppressor. Then you have this interaction with those conditions, which can give us some significant thinning. So with Brevis, they've created an app which is available, which they look at in terms of trying to help predict those impacts of that on the thinning effect. So there's a supportive objective tool to try and achieve that, which is good. Moving into multiple applications, you know, some people, this whole thing about increasing the rate and it just does the thinning. Sometimes if we keep increasing that rate, we can blow holes in the canopy, reducing crop load significantly in zones of the tree. So more and more we're moving to multiple applications. If we go to the next slide to explain that, Ross. So if I was going to multiple applications, sometimes traditionally we would have been 7 to 10 days apart with other chemistries. But if we look at the photosynthetic impact of metamitron, you see after an application, you get a dip in activity, and then relatively quickly, it's starting to lift back up after about 5 or 6 days. So we're saying definitely if you're going to do multiple applications, you need to be in that 4 to 6 day window. And then it's cumulative on that thinning effect. If you go longer than that, then it's going to be a separate thinning effect and less effective the longer you go out. Next. So the other thing about just understanding your chemistry is really critical to improve your result. The next thing is around just coverage and understanding where the workload is and really what I have to deal with in chemical thinning. And going out there and spending time in the canopy with the sprayer the week before you need to do the chemical thinning and understanding how I'm going to best get the chemistry to deposit in the zone of the tree that I need it to. Spray thinning is not the same as pesticide spraying, so you need to look at your calibrations and revise them carefully with water sensitive papers and other technologies that you can actually get out there and have a really good look at. You know, forward speed, airspeed, where the spray's projecting is really important. If we look at the next slide, Ross. And yeah, open up no, keep going. Sorry, and the graph, yeah. So if we use the fluorometer with metamitron as an example, and we're trying to target the tops, and a lot of people try and target the tops, we have a 37% suppression in the top of the tree, but we're getting 24% suppression in the bottom of the tree and still some overspray in the bottom of the adjacent row, which effectively accumulates up as you're spraying the whole block. And what you need to do is, this is one way with this fluorometer that we've been doing in terms of looking at coverage. You can do it with water sensitive papers and understand and manipulate your calibrations to maximize the target zone. Next slide, Ross. So just by manipulating and looking and changing nozzle settings, even though we're targeting the tops, we're increasing subtly that impact in the top of the tree to 43%. There was some that we did last year where the guy was spraying the tops of the tree. There was nothing deposited in the top half of the meter, some subtle changes, and we increased that to 50%. It's really important to get out there and calibrate and understand your spray rig for spray thinning. Next slide.
Okay, so Craig's given you some good chemistry that you might consider going forward, and we've also got John Wilton, who's our 80-year-old now chemical thinning guru, to put some notes together on all of the chemical options which are available on the APAL website. So a bit of a chemical thinning refresher. And also make sure that you jump on to the appropriate section on the website. There's quite a few historical notes about chemical thinning. Look at those, read those, speak to your advisors, and let's try and get 2020 to be the Mona Lisa. The next decision we're going to ask is, would extending your hand thinning period help? Use the model orchard again. 40 hectares, estimated 1.9 million harvested kilos. Historically, it's been our recommendation as plant physiologists and agronomists to get that hand thinning done nice and early, get in there as soon as you can and get it done over an 8-week thinning season. But 2021 is a bit different, and we've got to throw some ideals out the window and go with what's actually realistic. So let's assume we want to extend the period. We have to extend it. We're just not going to get the people to do it in an 8-week season. This orchard needs 6,500 odd thinning hours in total to thin the crop. If we work an 8-week thinning season, we need at 45 hours a week. That calculation says we need 18 thinners. But let's say this is different, this is unique. I'm sorry, Ross, I can't thin it and be finished by mid-January. I have to extend it. I have to try and go earlier. I need to go later. I'm going to make my thinning season this year 12 weeks, not 8 weeks. That drops my need of thinners substantially from 18 to 12. And if I work a little bit longer each week, and I know that's difficult with your award structure, and Jeremy's going to sort that out, aren't you, Jeremy? But if you're able to do that, it would even drop to 11 thinners. This is what we're doing on my orchard, is exactly what we're doing. And we're saying we can't get it physiologically perfect because we've got to go with a lower labour supply. So we're going to work out how do we do that with the least opportunity cost. So one of the things you might consider, you've nearly finished your pruning, you look at the job now, you can see the fruitful bud break coming. There's some blocks on your orchard where the spur bud numbers are pretty high. And you've got labour now, and you haven't got the big peak later. You could do some spur pruning right now. You could get in there with the snips or even hands with gloves on and be rubbing off buds underneath the branches on the bottom. So consider that. Some of you will have the opportunity for a real high premium for some early fruit, that Shepparton area. Maybe there's some blocks you could flower thin and get a really good return out of that. You've got the labour now, you want to take the peak out of it later. How do we actually start hand thinning earlier than normal? And two options worth considering is doing more with your primary thinning chemical options, or as Craig's mentioned, Metametron will thin the crop, will drop the fruit a lot quicker than BA or Carbaryl. So where do you use Metametron as your secondary thinner so that you can get in and start a bit earlier? Consider 2-pass thinning. What's wrong with getting a first pass done only to 80 to 90% of final crop load and then being able to cosmetically tart it up in late January, early February, just before you start picking? Nothing wrong with that, that works. And work out if you're gonna finish late, you're gonna be into late January, early February. Which blocks can you do that on with the lowest dollar impact? And I know some of your Pink Lady blocks will come into that category. Craig.
Yeah, so we've talked just about this Manhattan around this midsummer period and looking at how we squeeze and push this. The hand blossom thinning, I've got several clients that we've moved into this space and we're shifting some of this thinning peak into October and doing it manually. Sometimes that can just be cluster spacing. So if you've got really high fruit numbers, it's actually just removing every second, every third flower cluster quite simply by hand. Spray thinning we've gone through, and the removal of blocks, and that 2-pass thinning. So think about your own Manhattan, they'll be all different, and then actually how you manipulate those peaks.
So in summary, chemical thinning. First off, we suggest you understand where the hand thinning labour is likely to be short. If the answer is yes, then aim for 2020 to be the best you have ever achieved. Identify the blocks where aggressive chemical thinning makes commercial sense. Understand the various chemical modes of action. We can't come up with a recipe because there are so many variables. Debate those chemical strategies with your advisors early and then fine tune as the season unfolds. Try to spread your hand thinning season out by bringing some blocks forward and others late. And good idea now, Larissa, for you to put up our third poll question, which is, what's your chemical thinning strategy in 2020? Are you thinking it's less than normal, same as normal, more aggressive, or significantly more aggressive? So while I'm introducing the next slide, you can vote according to what you're currently thinking about chemical thinning. So we're now going to talk about harvest. Craig and I are very conscious we talked too long yesterday, so we're moving through these as quickly as we can. But here's the Manhattan of our model orchard. How do we take the labour peaks out of this harvest period? Can we reduce our pick a need from 15 through the Royal Gala and pear time, and about 25 pickers at this late peak? How can we manage those peaks? Craig.
So again, we come back to the Manhattan around labour. So if we think about how do we bring things forward, not overcropping our trees. Sometimes, I encourage people to have one block of a particular variety, have a light crop. So it brings it on earlier. Having great colour gives me the choice at any time to pick it. If I've got the colour today, I can pick it today, or I can leave it for a week. The platforms we've discussed, maybe it's leaving the last pick. We're only picking that really high quality fruit and pick 1 and pick 2. And then if we're trying to shift our harvest, maybe retain and harvest to have a place in our business, but we've got to be careful how we use those tools. Next slide. So I mentioned before about Metamitron being a game changer. One of the things that's moving pretty quickly around the apple industry globally is leaf plucking machinery. So this is one machine working in New Zealand this year, and there's leaf plucking machine similar to this in Shepparton. But it will be a game changer in terms of light levels and improving colour development in a tree. And if we had great colour, we have the ability, it increases our picker efficiency, and it allows us to sometimes pick things earlier and improve the situation dramatically than waiting for colour. In really hot climates, we can adjust this particular machine to further out from the tree, the oscillation of the airspeed, and we can adjust the level of leaf plucking that can deliver. It doesn't have to be exposed as the bottom right-hand slide. That's colour, Ross. The other one, just about delaying harvest. One of the things about both retain and harvest are effective tools and proven, and the harvester experience is building in Australia at the moment. But it's really important to plan that harvest window and understand where you're going to use it. It's that you just don't make a problem for yourself, that you're shifting volumes of fruit onto another steep week down the track. That you can reduce that peak this week, but next week it's just got steeper. I need more people, or I've got to walk away from something. So planning in that space is really important. It's also, both chemistries have an impact on colour, so it's important again to drive colour and only use it where you've got really good colour strains and potential to get that. And with both of these chemistries, where you apply it within the canopy can manipulate and improve picker efficiency. So sometimes we'll only put retain in the bottom half of the canopy, so that when we come in for our first pick, it's evened up that variation in those old spurs in the bottom of the tree, and then we can pick the whole tree in one pick instead of a light skim and a later pick through the tops. So great technologies with a proven record.
Larissa, I don't know if you can put up that poll of the where we go. So yeah, over half of you planning to be more aggressive in this coming season. So interesting. That's possibly what you'd expect. So all the chemical thinning agronomists out there, the challenge is upon you for the district to be able to reduce its hand thinning requirement by 25% and still have some pretty nice crops. So there you go, good challenge for everybody. So the final decision is, do we need to reduce the number of picks? And I know Australians love being able to strip pick blocks, but let's think about, how you make harvest as efficient as possible. Craig said that if you've got good colour, it will make harvest more efficient. And one of those things is fruit in singles. Obviously you get better colour with that. The leaf blower that Craig showed you, another way. Various technologies to make that colour as good as it can be, to make harvest as efficient as it can be. I know how critical, when you're multiple picking a block, how critical it is to the labour efficiency when you go into that block. And going in, the difference between day 1 versus day 3 or 4 can be massive in terms of picker efficiency, the number of bins each picker can pick per day. So really good timing of when the picks occurred. Before the season come up, perhaps you've got to identify what the low profit picks are. For me, it's those last picks of Braeburn. That if we've got a shortage of people and we're struggling to get around, we already have an idea in our head which picks we are going to walk away from or relegate them to juice. And under an extreme situation, and I know this has happened in the States, extreme labour situation, extreme shortages, they already know, or they've got a plan as to which blocks need to be bypassed if the proverbial really hits the fan. Work out which ones they are that have the least impact on your bottom line. This is all going to have an impact. It's mitigating it, it's managing it, it's trying to minimise the impact of this labour crisis. Craig.
So again, good planning. This is the model orchard over a 12-month period, but would challenge everyone to do their own plan and work out how that fits and where those peaks and troughs are, and then working through their own strategies to flatten and spread this peak and troughs out.
Okay,
Ross,
so
there's a few Q&As there. Have we got time to answer any of them or not? Is it up to Rose?
Yes, please.
I guess
Quickly.
you have time.
Someone asked about the leaf plucking and post-harvest phosphatic capacity, carbohydrate accumulation impacts on the following season. There's a lot of research going on currently in the leaf blower space, and there's been several studies at the moment. We haven't seen any change. We're doing our own work here, looking at that specifically. There's been a range of manual leaf plucking for 5 to 10 years even, and we haven't seen significant problems with that, but it's probably not to the extent or the coverage of the whole tree that we are using with mechanical leaf plucking. Experience with the Darwin, my experience is, look, it's got a lot of potential. It can overthin, but timing's critical in terms of avoiding any physical damage on the fruitlet. So you need to build an experience. In stone fruit, an absolute game changer. I think it's a fantastic piece in stone fruit. Ross, have you got any experience with the Darwin?
No, I'd just reinforce what you're mentioning. We're probably not enough experience in the Hawke's Bay for that to be a major one this coming year, but certainly our big stone fruit growers here that are really facing, you know, a real labour problem, they are definitely into the Darwin thinner, using the string thinners. Kevin makes a comment about 2-pass thinning, and thinning late in January where the sun is really hot. You've got to be very careful about exposing fruit to high levels of UV and creating sunburn. Absolutely correct. So that needs to come into your decision making. And there's lots of things you can do to manage that, but really good point, Kevin. Thank you.
Okay, if there are any other questions, please feel free to type them in throughout the rest of the webinar. We'll try and get back to those if we can. Thanks very much, Ross and Craig. We'll now invite the panel members to join us on camera for an interactive question and answer session. Today's panel will be moderated by Justin Smith, the Industry Services and Export Manager at APAL, and he will be joined by Nathan Baronio from Eastern Colour Orchards in Stanthorpe, Ian Pearce from Stoneleigh Orchards in Orange, Jeremy Smart from Tingart Barra Orchard in Batlow, Brent Reeve from Jeffrey Thompson Orchards in the Goulburn Valley, and Jeremy Griffith from APAL. Please take advantage of this opportunity to ask any questions that you have about how others are addressing labour issues or about the labour situation in Australia. As mentioned earlier, if you'd like to ask a question, use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, or raise your hand if you're keen to join us on camera. I'm now going to hand over to Justin to lead the discussion.
Thank you, Rose, and thanks to the 4 panel members for joining us today. Just to reiterate what Rose just mentioned, I know this is you know, a little bit different in terms of a Q&A or you know, sort of a panel discussion, but you know, if people do have a question they want to ask, please do use the 2 ways in which you can ask those questions, you know, of your fellow growers. Secondly, and before we get into the panel discussion, if anyone has any questions for Jeremy Griffith from APAL around the government side of things, we didn't have a Q&A directly at the end of his session, but Jeremy's available if anyone does have any questions. And look, really just continuing on from the key discussion points that both Craig and Ross have just worked through now, what we're sort of keen to get the panel discussion happening around is, I guess, looking at those 3 sort of key pillars of labour for the next, you know, 4 to 6 months around thinning and harvest. And so if I can actually maybe jump up to Nathan in Stanthorpe. Nathan, you know, conscious that apples form a part of your operation and you've got other fruits up there. One of the things I think we've talked about is how we can perhaps spread the workload out over different categories and different areas. And is that something that you guys have looked at in your operation to sort of manage labour and give people, you know, that longer term commitment to work so that you can, you know, sort of manage your different areas that you've got in your operation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, by utilising the different lines and keeping good staff in constant work, it forms as a bit of a marketing tool that we use in order to keep staff. So, you know, moving them between different areas, between the strawberries and the apples, and it keeps all the jobs on, it keeps us on top of the jobs, but then it also, in a way, it keeps a bit of a freshness to the employees' work. You know, there's only so many strawberries you can probably look at in a year before you start going crazy, and likewise with apples. So having that variability does help our business quite a bit.
And I like that term you use, you know, sort of you're now marketing to get and keep and retain the best labour. In terms of, you know, Queensland is obviously in an enviable position compared to us down here in Victoria, although perhaps the rest of Australia is in an enviable position. Is that something you're looking at to attract labour to your operation in the region, in how you position the work and the opportunity for people to come and get, you know, plenty of work and have that consistent sort of employment for them?
Yeah, definitely. I guess, you know, no matter how you look at it, whether you're selling fruit or whether you're getting workers, it's a competitive world that we live in. And part of that is telling a story and showing people why, you know, this is where you want to work. You know, marketing in business is, you never rely on one thing, you know, it's a multi-pronged approach. You need to have multiple avenues. And that's something that I've worked at really hard with my brother and the team that we got here, is to have lots of different avenues to draw upon, lots of different staff to mitigate our risk. I mean, we do it in every other facet of the business. We protect our crops. We have multiple water sources. Why wouldn't we look to have multiple employment sources? So, you know, when the bad does happen, you've got more avenues to call upon.
Yeah, good. And if I move down to Orange and Ian Pearce, and I know you've got sort of multiple crops on your site, but in terms of looking at different avenues and having that sort of backup plan B, plan C, you know, however many plans you need, are you looking at different options for your labour this year compared to a traditional year?
Well, the different options probably are that I'm not expecting we are going to have a lot of backpackers. So concentrating on talking to a couple of different labour contractors and had a face-to-face meeting this week. So I'm reasonably confident that we're going to get enough seasonal workers actually for a lot of my picking for both cherries and apples. So that's good, but I've also spoken to another one or two labour contractors, and they're telling me that they think that they're going to have people available for picking. But in addition to that, it's interesting, we've been approached by a couple of groups of school kids from out of Sydney, and they're wanting to form teams and picking teams and come up, so I've sort of encouraged that. They want to start on some cherries at young and then move to orange and so on. So they're good things. And yeah, that's really the main thing, is just trying to communicate with your labour sources effectively and proactively, and really try and be a bit more organised than normal.
Very good. And that's interesting, the school kids from Sydney, is that something that's come through a private sort of connection or network, or how did that sort of come about? Because that's been talked about in Melbourne a bit lately.
A friend just rang me yesterday, and I know their friends in Sydney, and their children actually came to them and said, well, what are we going to do next year in Sydney, you know, work-wise, to get some income if they want to travel later, if restrictions ease, or, you know, there's not going to be casual work available, they think, in traditional avenues in hospitality and things. So, yeah, that's off their own bat, and they've been proactively trying to find work avenues.
Yeah, that's interesting. We've talked about that at APAL, and in fact, our head of comms is in a similar position with school leavers, and, you know, the traditional gap year, a lot of kids are thinking, well, do I want to go to uni next year, and potentially my sort of whole uni experience in the introduction is online, and, you know, so maybe it's the year to take that year off, but then what do you do for work? And you know, our industry perhaps sits nicely in, you know, you can come in, make plenty of money through the summer, and if the world opens up a bit later in the year, there's an opportunity to do that. So I think, yeah, that's a really interesting one for us to look at in terms of getting motivated people who, you know, they'll come and do it, you know, hard and for a short period of time. And so that's a really good one. In terms of what Ross and Craig sort of had a look at now, have you started thinking about how you might manage your operation to sort of spread labour, or, you know, in terms of manage it differently, or are you not as concerned because it seems as though you might have access to what you need?
Well, I'm sort of fortuitously, I made a decision some time ago to graft about 12 or 14% of my apple area this season. So I've made that decision. So it's actually quite fortuitous. That's going to reduce a fair bit of the thinning and picking demand, although there'll be a bit of extra tree training, I hope. But other than that, no, other than being proactive, you know, I don't think we can. We'd like to move to platforms, but I don't have all my orchard in the state ready for platforms yet. So that's a more a medium to long term thing. Chemical thinning, yes, I agree with that. We will certainly try and focus on that. No, that not a lot of other difference other than that.
Okay, great. Jeremy Smart down in Batlow. Was talking to Jeremy yesterday, so I'm hoping he's online because he was madly trying to get spraying done before rains come in the next week. Jeremy, what have you guys looked at differently this year in terms of how you might manage the workload to smooth it out at all, or is that not something you've considered as yet?
No, we're in a fortunate situation. We've been assured our small number of workers that we need. However, after seeing Ross's presentation, I feel like he stole most of my notes. We've discussed our chemical thinning program being slightly more aggressive. We went probably a little bit harder with some of our pruning in a couple of blocks to remove excess bud at that point, to reduce the thinning load. And we've even got a small crew in at the moment just doing some of that spur pruning, which just to try and take out those peaks, I guess, of labour demand. So, yeah, so we've implemented quite a few of those little strategies, and so moving forward.
And we've had a question from Ian Goodwin. Have you, and I'll ask you, and we can ask the others, but have you actively sort of looked at parking any of your blocks or just letting them be this season, or are you going to go hard across the board?
Well, I guess we didn't have a choice. We parked up a few blocks due to bushfire. So we used that opportunity to, I guess, reassess what blocks would come out. So that was the least profitable blocks removed, obviously with a bit of fire damage, and sort of use that as a resetting point there as to where we can put work up new ground and get some younger trees in. I guess for us, with the longer term goal, we're trying to get all of our wider plantings across. We've probably got about 70% of the orchard now on sort of the 3.5 metre rows. So we are quite actively looking towards platform use.
Excellent.
And I don't know, I feel like this year could be that catalyst for, making that happen. So, and if all these things that Ross has said in his little presentation, I feel that's, as an industry, if everybody can get that right, the quality of fruits across the board will lift, and again, it sets a benchmark for the years to come. So,
excellent. And in terms of platforms, are many in Batlow using them, and do you have access to get them in to even give them a trial or run them through the orchard? Have you done that?
No, that's the catch. I only know of, I think Montagues have a couple over around there, and most of the other people we know are all in Victoria, which we cannot access. So that is kind of holding us up at this stage. It's trying to make a decision on what's the right one without being able to, actually see it or do it. So you can't buy it.
Yeah, well, that's certainly something we've talked about in the office is I think, and spurred on by this is, what can we do to bring all of those options, maybe even have a platform field day or something, where we can get everyone together and have a look, but a little challenging at this time. Good segue, mentioning Victoria. I'll jump down to Brent from Jeffrey Thompson's. I guess, Brent, being right up as arguably our industry's largest grower, have you viewed sort of how you manage your blocks and that, the potential to really park some or aggressively manage some out this year so that you can focus on a slightly smaller subset of what you've got and go hard on those blocks?
No, we're definitely not going to park any blocks. We need fruit. It's all about growing fruit and making money. So that's where we're at there. We will look at some of the blocks and probably aggressively primary thin a couple of blocks on each site, so as we can start hand thinning earlier there. Looking at a lot of our younger trees, probably doing some blossom thinning to start that process and keep some of our staff employed over the next month before we can really start getting into hand thinning. Yeah, so also extending our thinning, I think, as Ross and Craig said as well, you know, usually we've got that 1 or 2 weeks sort of where we've got a lull period before we start harvesting in that January period. So I think if we are doing an 80% job the first time, and then we can do a bit of tidy up thinning, especially on pink ladies, just to keep that labour force employed right through until we do start harvesting. So
yeah, good. It was mentioned yesterday. We had this session, obviously, with the Southern Loop yesterday. But you know, one of the sort of topics that came up a lot yesterday was that sort of pastoral care, showing your workforce that, you know, it's a good place to work, it's a safe place to work. Like you know, you don't just have a COVID plan, but it's taken seriously and you've put in place things. What have you guys sort of looked at maybe doing differently, or how you might have invested some money to be an attractive, you know, an employer of choice, and maybe do things a bit differently just to show, you know, to keep people engaged in you know, in these times?
Yeah, we're doing up quite a few houses around on our orchards, and so we've got some more accommodation ourselves to house some staff there, which is, you know, really good accommodation for people. We've also invested in some vehicles for transport and so forth for the people as well. Looking at putting in some really, you know, training programs and having extra staff to actually train people, to make them understand the job better, to be able to be more efficient, and hopefully if they're more efficient, then they're doing the job better and want to stay and retain the job on our farms.
And is that starting with training around, you know, in the thinning process, or is that a harvest focus?
I think in both. You know, anyone can go out and pull a fruit off a tree and thin it, but can you do it effectively and efficiently? So, you know, usually, well, especially in the harvest process, you know, we generally focus on bruising. So when we've got anyone training new staff, then their main objective is to make sure somebody doesn't bruise the fruit. So you're always doing slow motions, placing fruit really gently. You're never focusing on how people can do that quicker and still not bruise the fruit. So I think that's one thing where we're really going to focus on this year, is showing them how to harvest it to start with without bruising, but then have some people that can go around and help people get more efficient throughout that process.
Yeah, excellent. Nathan, up in Stanthorpe, I mean, Queensland's up in those hills, not, you know, doesn't get much better than that to be outside and outdoors. Are you guys thinking as a community and as an industry up there of what you might be able to do to be an attractive place for people to come and spend their sort of summer break, or, you know, extending out into Easter time to pick apples? Is that something that the group of you growers up there have talked about or thought about?
Oh, well, it's a pretty good place. As our mayor says, this is where we turn water into wine. But look, you know, I think all farms, the Granite Belt Growers Association, we're all doing absolutely everything we can to try and give as much encouragement to all those seasonal workers, not just backpackers, Pacific Islanders, displaced Australians, uni students, grade 12, as the encouragement to come and pick some fruit in the area. And, you know, we're pretty lucky, 2.5 hours away from Brisbane. It's you know, trying to really advertise those benefits that we have for our geographical location.
Yeah, good. And in terms of technology or anything, have you guys considered or thought about platforms or how you might make life easier? It was mentioned, one of the, you know, things that was mentioned yesterday on our call was, you know, in Newton's in WA, have looked at things like, well, smaller bags, so that you can, you know, you can't expect perhaps that you know, to have the big burly strong people at all times. So, you know, different ladders perhaps, or or even just a different way of moving through the orchard. Have you guys considered any of those sorts of things to, I guess, attract a broader spectrum of people that might be physically capable to do the job?
Yeah, look, I guess we have been doing that sort of stuff, not so much with the objective of opening it up to more people being able to do the job, but that's just the world that we live in at this day and age. Once upon a time there was other focuses, but now the focus is making the job easier. For multiple reasons. Labour is so expensive. It's one of the few expenses that we've got that goes up 3% every year. But then also a happy worker doesn't leave a job. So if you make a job easy, if you make a job fun, if you make a workplace fun, they're more likely to stay. If people stay, I've got less office staff doing inductions. If people stay, I've got less supervisors training. If people stay, I've got a workforce that's, more committed. So all those things have to be considered and implemented as much as possible, definitely.
Yeah, no, good. I think that's a really well said. I think it doesn't matter what environment it is, but the worst cost is retraining and retooling a group of people to do a job. And if you don't have to do that because the happy ones are staying and kicking on, your total cost is much more effective. That's a really good point, Nathan. Jeremy, back down to you in Batlow. In terms of the Batlow community, after everything you guys have been through, how are you looking at, sort of labour across your region? And, are there things that you guys are considering to make it an attractive proposition for people to sort of commit for multiple months to stay around and do the picking with you?
Well, personally, we use a labour hire company. And I know they're pretty broadly used in the area. They have a very solid base of workers that are here. They've been with them for more than 5 years. They live in town. They own multiple houses in town for accommodation. They look after their workers. So to me, that's quite a sustainable business going forward, the way that Excellent. They operate. So, and knowing they get, again, other workers to come in. But again, I was just talking to them this week and they've got their base here ready to go for the thinning pretty well. So, I think knowing that how they set up and how serious they're taking the issue, because it's their core business, we put a lot of faith in them that they're going to do the right thing. In the past, we have tried to risk manage by having a couple of different contractors. However, that's one of them hasn't survived COVID, I don't think. So, the focus in a different area. But yeah, I think it's just having that connection with them and the open communication with our contractor, and let's keep making sure they've got happy workers as well. Look, our orchard, we keep it nice. We keep it user friendly, I guess, worker friendly. So we always seem to get the workers. We hope that continues. I guess the size of the orchard for us is a big one. That's on our side, only needing sort of a dozen or so workers during the peak time. So,
oh, good. Brent, in terms of, I guess you guys down there in Shepparton, I know you need a large amount of people to sort of work through the season. One of the things that was mentioned again yesterday was around carpooling, people coming in and out of cities, not understanding the rules and regulations as they sit at the moment. Is that at all looking like it could be a problem for you guys in terms of, people perhaps being a bit reticent to move around at the moment?
I suppose it is a bit of a worry. That always probably can happen, but we use quite a few different labour contractors here, and they've all got a good base of people that are locals here. So I suppose, looking at that and looking at the end of harvest last year, we usually have a huge turnover of staff, and with COVID last year when it hit, with our granny harvest and our pink lady harvest, we had hardly anybody leave, so everybody stayed. Efficiencies got so much better because they actually were doing the job longer. So hopefully that will be the case as well. you know, we can easily drop 50 or 100 people off our books of what we normally have if we've got a better workforce that stays longer.
So that what would you put that down to? Was that just more that in uncertain times people put their head down and are less likely to sort of jump?
I think so. I think it was, you know, a lot of the backpackers that were there, you know, usually they come and they start and they go, you know, we've had a week, we've done our 88 days, we're off to Sydney now to do a bit of partying, or to Melbourne or wherever it may be. And, you know, those backpackers, they just didn't leave. They'd done their 88 days, I presume, and went, well, we can't go anywhere. There's no other job, so we're going to stay. I've had a few people ring me asking me, you know, is there any work? There was one girl that I met in a bar up in far north Queensland when I was at up the Cape, and yeah, gave her my card and she rang up, and obviously there's no work in bars or anything else, so yeah, there could be a lot of backpackers that actually still do harvest our fruit for us.
Well, that's a really interesting sort of way of looking at it. But, you know, I certainly know a few people from overseas who have been working in bars and cafes at the moment in Melbourne, and they're certainly not doing anything at the moment. So, you know, perhaps this brings an opportunity to have less churn through the season, as you say. I mean, that's remarkable that you can drop maybe a fifth of your pickers by not having to deal with retraining and dealing with people coming and going.
Justin, it's
yes.
Jeremy here. Look, interesting, if you look at the statistics of, obviously, you look at the government figures of the amount of people applying for the working holiday program. Obviously, there's been a massive drop-off of people coming because the borders have been closed. But if you actually look at the people who are applying from year 1 to year 2, those numbers actually held up over the last 12 months. So it's basically indicating that if they're here, they've got nothing else to do. So they're actually applying en masse to stay here for the second-year visa. So that's interesting insight.
That is. Just conscious of time, I know we've got a few videos from the frontline advisors to work through today. Just to the audience out there, I'm just checking their Q&A, and it doesn't appear though there are any questions. Does anyone have a question that they'd like to ask any of our panellists, or even just hand over back to the panellists, and if there's anything else they'd like to add or you know, get off your chest to your industry now in terms of the topic we've been talking about today?
Justin, we've had a question come in by text.
Oh, excellent.
Are there any ideas on how growers are applying COVID safe practices? For example, are you splitting up crews into separate teams to enable tracking, I guess? Any separate accommodations and that kind of thing, just to make it easier, I guess, to track the movement and in the event that COVID does come in?
Yeah, Brent. So we are on our site. So we've got working groups and teams that will keep people in. We'll have separate toilet facilities for each group and make sure that they're using those and keeping the workforce separated in that regard.
Currently, for us, we have the plans there ready to go should we need to, because we had separate crews when the first hit of the virus kicked off. But at this stage, we've got a scaled back version of that. Ours has been more focused towards cleaning and maintenance and wiping down of particular services and focusing our attention on indoor facilities more so than outdoor. Kind of been shown that indoor and shed packing facilities, lunchrooms, they're the most high risk areas. So focusing the attention in those areas with cleaning.
We're in negotiations with our contractors for just getting some kind of tracking if our crew has to leave here, if they need to be somewhere else, we know where they've been, when they've been. It's something simple, just a nice simple spreadsheet with the dates and the names of all the pickets, all the workers, so we can keep a track. If in the case something happens, we can at least trace them. So.
Yeah, that's right. I think, look, what we've probably learned here in Melbourne is that, the better you do that and understand and have those things in place, if something does happen, the quicker you can come out the other side and get back to work. I think the risk of people stepping in and stopping you doing things will happen when you haven't applied that as well as perhaps you could And I think Jeremy gave an example earlier of, you can come out very quickly if there's confidence in what you're doing, how you're tracking, and how you're managing that situation. Guys, I'm going to say thank you very much to our panel members, Nathan, Ian, Jeremy and Brent. Thank you so much for your time and being prepared to jump on camera. And I will hand back to Rose.
Thanks, mate.
Thanks very much, Justin, and thank you, Nathan, Ian, Jeremy Smart, Brent and Jeremy Griffith for the great discussion and for taking the time to come on camera and participate. Because we're not able to host orchard walks in many of the growing regions, some of our FLAs have put together videos with growers that they've been working with to share what is happening in their regions. And we're going to take a look at the results of some of those trials now in New South Wales and Victoria. So I'd first like to invite Kevin Dodds, our FLA for Batlow, to introduce his video.
Thanks, Rose. Can you hear me okay?
Perfect.
Yep. Thanks, Rose. And hi, everybody. It's great, I think, to bring all the regions together. I think might be the first time for one of the orchard walks, albeit by Zoom. So it's a bit exciting to be able to do that. And also exciting to be able to share these videos that the FLAs have put together for the growers and for APAL. So in regards to the Batlow video, in June 2019, the Batlow Community Orchard Group identified challenges in woolly aphid control as an area worth further investigation as one of our annual local studies. The study started with a review of the literature, and from that review, the importance of earwigs as a predator of woolly apple aphid shone through as an opportunity for further investigation. The field study was established to monitor earwig numbers throughout the season, and this was done across 4 blocks, 1 organic, 2 conventional and 1 IPM block. The full report for the study will be published on the APAL website shortly for anybody wishing to see the detailed results. And within that, there are some links to some useful papers that outline chemical toxicity to earwigs, which is an important step in looking at preserving earwigs on orchards. I'd like to acknowledge Ian Cathels, Jeremy Smart, Ralph Wilson and Daryl Watkins for allowing me to monitor their blocks. And in particular, Ian and Jeremy, who also agreed to participate in this video. Yeah, welcome everybody. We're here today at Ardrossan Orchard. I'm with Ian Cathels today, the owner and manager of Ardrossan, and we're in the Woodburn Orchard where Ian's doing a bit of work with organics. Hi Ian, how are you going?
Good, thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for having us on Woodburn Orchard. Last year you were part of one of our future orchard trials looking at monitoring for earwigs and the benefit that they provide for woolly aphid control. I just wanted to ask you, did you learn something from that, and what would that be?
Yes, out of that trial, what we learnt was the numbers of earwigs that were in the orchard and the benefit they were giving us both in the organics and the conventional. And it also brought home, especially in the organics, what we were looking for was to control it more naturally than bringing in insecticides, and it was working very well. And it's something that we could then roll out in the conventional side, and it's the benefits just flow on. So
at the end of the day, was woolly aphid an issue for you in your organic blocks last season?
No, and it honestly hasn't. That's the amazing part. The first year we ever changed to organics in that block, I think probably in November time of year, where you start to notice woolly aphids blowing up, and I thought, well, this is just not going to work from day one. I think in probably 2 weeks later, we noticed all the woolly aphids was gone, and ever since then, we haven't had any problem with woolly aphids in the organics.
That's great. Well, thanks for your time today, Ian. We'll catch you on another visit.
Righto, Kevin. Thank you.
Cheers, bye. Our next stop is Tingara, and I'm speaking with Jeremy Smart. G'day, Jeremy.
G'day, Kevin. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Thanks for having us on the property.
Yeah, no problem.
And sparing a bit of time to talk about future orchard stuff. You were involved with the earwig monitoring project last season. We did that because we wanted to know, whether earwigs were around in enough numbers to help control woolly aphid. So how did that go for you? What did you learn from that exercise?
Well, from that exercise, we learnt there were very little in the way of earwig population. Obviously, over the years, there's been some sort of use of chemicals that have not been very nice to the earwigs, which we have since learnt about what chemicals they are. So we've identified those, and in the block that we're monitoring, we've cut those chemical use out altogether. Yeah, so as part of the project, we seeded in some population there, so we're hoping to build them up over the coming years. Unfortunately, they do only breed at a slow rate.
That's right. Yeah,
So,
only a couple of generations per season, I think.
Yeah. So that'll take a bit of time, but we seem to be getting some good control in there.
Mm-hmm.
We were a little bit disrupted with the bushfires this year, as with everyone and everything. But yeah, we're pretty positive about it.
Yeah, and when we were chatting before, you mentioned that you've seen aphelinus in reasonable numbers in the block too. So obviously you see that as part of the overall picture for controlling woolly.
Yeah, I guess that was probably one of the big learnings of being using them in conjunction with each other, having the earwigs there early on in the season until the aphelinus have had enough time to build up and breed and get out and do what they have to do. So with both of them working in there, we should bring it back under control.
Yeah, hopefully. I noticed last season you had some little stick houses, if you like, around the place for the earwigs. So building little sort of places they can shelter and
giving them the right habitat. I guess that's all part of it.
Yeah.
So,
Great, okay.
So we try to keep the floor pretty clean, so there's not the leaf matter there and all the broadleaf for them to get under.
Yeah.
So we need somewhere for them to feel safe. So.
Thanks, Jeremy. Thanks for having us on,
no worries.
on the
Thanks
orchard.
for being part of the project too, Ken.
Yeah, good on you. No worries.
Thanks very much, Kevin. We're going to move through all the videos, and then if anyone has any questions, we'll come to those at the end, if there's time. So our next FLA is Jess Burnley. She's based in Orange.
Thank you everyone for coming along today. I hope there's a few Orange people out there and Bilpin people. So we completed all of our trials and I presented them at the last Future Orchard Walk. So that was the mulch trial and the crop loading trial that we did last season. So this video is more of a reflection on how our focus orchard at Stoneleigh with Ian Pearce and Prue Pearce, how they kind of what challenges they faced last season and then what they're excited for this season. And then I just do a little bit of a discussion on what trials we're going to do the coming season for Future Orchards. So a few of the growers in Orange and Bilpin were involved in a bud dissection trial that I did, and we had some really interesting results. I'm hoping to publish them very shortly, so you'll all get your hands on those soon. And then we're also collaborating with the Victorian guys on a value adding survey. So what growers are doing with their fruit if they cannot market them. Are they going to juice, cider, apple pies? So that'll be quite interesting and good to collaborate with Victoria down there. So yes, thank you Ian for contributing to this little video, and we'll jump right into it. Thanks everyone for coming along this morning to our virtual Future Orchard Walk. I'm here standing at Ian Pearce's place at Stoneleigh, our focus orchard block for Orange, in the rain, which is something that we haven't seen for a long time. So it's pretty fantastic that we can finally say we've got some rain. I know many of the orchardists around the district are pretty happy with that, but fingers crossed we can get some more. Just wanted to give a very quick update on our trials for this season. So I put out an email a little while ago asking for people to be involved in a bud dissection project, which I've done and collected, and we've got some pretty interesting results. So many of our high-performing blocks, like our Pink Ladies, Kansies and Bravo, all seem to have quite good floral buds, proportionally to vegetative buds. We are looking to have a little bit of problems with blocks that hadn't been watered this year. So I'm standing in one of Pearcey's blocks that he did unfortunately have to shut off, and we're looking at about a 50%
floral bud in here, and that's kind of the same in many blocks that were shut off. This year we're also going to do a value adding survey, so what we can do with fruit that can't go to market. So can we juice it, can we put it into cider production, what are other options out there for growers? So yeah, that's us this year. Might jump out of the rain and get stuck into Piercy's feedback. So we're here with future orchardist Ian Pearce in Orange. We're just going to have a quick chat about how last season went and plans for this season. So Piercy, how did last season go?
Well, it was a year of big variances. We obviously had a very, very severe drought, and so that was the single biggest factor in the whole season. The drought conditions, so that's moisture, but also temperatures. And that drought effect led to varied results. So I found that in our early varieties of Galaxy, which is a Gala variant, it was disastrous. We had big problems. I just couldn't keep the moisture up to trees which are older and bigger and a bit more voracious in their water appetite. And on the reverse side of that, I did limit my irrigation on those. And then on the reverse side was the younger trellis blocks of Pink Ladies and Bravos particularly did very well. And so I was very happy with those results. So, but they did get a better treatment.
Yeah, so we also did a mulch trial in your young Bravos. We didn't get the results that we kind of wanted with lack of nitrogen.
No, we didn't.
But what are your plans now for that block now that we know that they were a little bit starved for nitrogen? Have you got a plan for this season?
Yes, so well, that block's inherently got a few problems in it anyway. So this year we had some trees that just weren't performing, and I was able to source some other ones, and we've replanted some trees in that block. I've saved the ones we pulled out in the hope that we might spark them into action in a little nursery. So we've done that. I will be pursuing a higher nitrogen application rate because that mulch, the pine bark mulch, is still there, and I'm pretty sure there's going to be an ongoing drawdown. So we'll probably up that nutrition program a little bit, not overly, but certainly more than we did. And in addition, I've also moved the 2 drip lines so that both were right against the trunks, and we're now spreading them out so that they're probably about 20 to 30 centimetres off the row line either side. And I think that will help our performance of the trees in that block by just encouraging those roots into a bigger root zone. And the other thing I am doing is I'm only doing done a tiny bit of pruning in them. I'm trying to maintain every bit of leaf area I can in that block to try and get my photosynthetic capacity up and get the trees moving a bit better. And the other thing we will do is thin very selectively. There are trees that are capable of carrying a reasonable crop on them in that block this year, but there are others that I'll want to really limit what they have on them.
Yeah, awesome. And final question,
yes.
With the Future Orchards current project coming to an end at the end of this season, what was your favourite part of being a part of the Focus Orchards, and did you overcome any challenges when you first started being part of this program?
Yeah, look, I've enjoyed being a part of it for a few reasons, but probably one of the biggest ones is that you get external inputs into what you're doing from sources that you may not otherwise have. So, and that's many and varied sources. So I think getting those external sources of information and interacting with people like the Ag First guys is very good. Also just having other people to your farm and getting their view on what's happening when you have field days, I think that's good. I'm very happy with that. And and just the resources that go with it. So, the backup that program provides, I think is very good.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Piercy. Enjoy the rain.
Yes.
Thanks very much, Jess. I think there's a bit of hat envy going around after people have watched that video. We're going to move into the Goulburn Valley now to Mick Crisera for his video. Mick, would you like to give us a brief background on what you're doing?
Okay, thanks, Rose. Yeah, just a so my video is pretty much just a chat with Alex Turnbull from Turnbull Brothers here in Shepparton or in the GV. Just how being a focus orchard has really helped their business, especially in the areas of crop regulation and the help that they get from Ag First guys. I think I think the video will speak for itself, and also just touching briefly on how they're sort of working with the labour challenges and also the efficiencies in what they're doing on their orchard. So. Hello everyone, I'm Michael Crisera. I'm actually the FLA for the Goulburn Valley. Welcome to the September Orchard Walk. We're at Turnbull Brothers Orchards today to have a look at some of the focus blocks and also some of the efficiencies in labour that Turnbulls are really excelling in at the moment.
Yeah, I'm Alex Turnbull of Turnbull Brothers Orchards. We've been farming in the Goulburn Valley for 126 years. Sort of more in the last sort of couple of decades, we've gone from more of a canning focused orchard to more of a fresh product. So we're predominantly apples, but we've still got pears, cherries, peaches and a few plums.
Obviously you're the focus orchard for the GV, so what were the main reasons for becoming part of the focus orchard program?
Well, a couple of things. We're always looking to improve, and as many brains as we can put into the orchard in making it a better place is what we do. But probably significant challenges we had with, I think that most apple growers or any grower can relate to, is crop load management. We were getting biannual issues. We were either oversizing or undersizing. We weren't sort of hitting that sweet spot, and that really was a focus of our orchard. We've got a saying or a mantra that we work on called TC1 or Target Class 1, and that's the targeted size fruit. So size fruit in that Class 1 range, and we're really trying to lift our percentage, and we've seen significant increases in that area. So. Okay, in terms of the work that we've adopted, we've worked really hard on the TCA and getting those sort of numbers right and working with. So just a few numbers on this block. So we had a tree diameter of about 40, and then we worked on 8.6 fruits per TCA. So that popped out with what we wanted to get. So we wanted 156 buds, and we're working on 1.3 buds per fruit. So we believe that these are okay, in terms of the dormant bud sort of thing. They don't really need that help. So we really set our eyes on that target and really worked hard on our pruning. So you can see that we're in a 2D system here, and we were aiming for 156 buds, and I think he ended up getting 155.5. So our pruning team and pruning manager has done an excellent job here. So what we're pretty ambitious with our 8.6 fruits per TCA, but we've just got to really get it right during that chemical thinning. So these platforms are doing two different heights. So we've got one over there, and so one's pruning the low part and one's pruning the high part. We've done the bottoms already.
So how long have you had these platforms?
This is our third season with them.
Yep.
Probably our second season pruning majority of the time on them, and they can cover a lot of territory. So no, they've been really good. But we sort of anticipate a pretty big pink lady crop this year, so we're pruning really hard because we don't want to play in that small fruit area. So I'm going to take these off. We're pruning down we're pruning much harder than we ever have. The buds look really good. We didn't have a massive crop on them last year, so it's starting to swell up now, and we've actually made a few mistakes in this block in terms of letting these side laterals get these sort of fruiting positions get too big. So we're going through a process of taking a few out now to renew the wood. So it's now 10 years old, this block, so it's just time to do a bit of renovation on it. But we're still looking to get in the bin about 90 tonnes per hectare. So again, just an up close of our platform. Probably just the first thing to say is these guys that we've got on here from Samoa through the seasonal works program. We did all our harvesting last season with our Samoan team, which we love. They're like family now, and but we've also kept quite a number of them for the pruning season, planting, and those sorts of things. So that's been a really good program and a really good initiative in our business, and so we love it. I guess also just to talk about, we're working on this platform here. We're running a very two-dimensional system, or 2D system, the traditional 2D system, and we're getting, just in terms of the costs to prune this and thin this per hectare, and it's a very uniform system, a very manageable compared to what we get as a return. So you know, you can see that we've got 2 people on this machine. We can get up to 4, but just in this current situation where we've got 2 platforms in this block, one pruning at this height. We've already pruned the bottom, and we've got another one pruning the very high part, and that's working very well. We find that 2 people during pruning to be a really good system. But I guess just back onto that seasonal works program, you know, I really encourage people to have a look at it. It's been a really successful program for us.
Thanks very much, Mick. There aren't any questions in the Q&A box, so you've got about 30 seconds to speed type any burning questions into that box. Ross and Craig, do you have any comments on the trials or any, before we close for today, would you like to make any closing comments on the discussion, the panel discussion, or the videos that we've just seen?
No, my hat's off to, you know, the FLAs and the focus orchards around the country. I mean, hats off to the whole organisation of this event. I think it's been a fantastic coming together of the whole industry, and you know, it just shows you the good stuff that's happening in each region and how the regions are coming together, doing their own trials which are important to them, and the Focus Orchard Network is designed to support all that. So look, I'm sitting here with a big smile on my face, Rose. That it's been, and hopefully the participants have agreed, it's been a really good session.
Great. We've had a bit of feedback already about if there are any people out there that have any experiences to share about platforms and what types of platforms they're using, and I guess how they work on different terrains and things like that. Maybe that's something that we can focus on for the next event, whatever form that may take. All right, I would like to thank Kevin, Jess, Mick, and your respective growers who participated in making the videos. It was very generous of you to give up your time to contribute to those videos. It's really interesting, as Kevin mentioned. It's a nice opportunity to share across the regions, which we normally don't have in person, I guess. That's all we've got time for today. So if you've got any other questions that you would like to follow up with the FLAs about the videos, or Ross and Craig about their presentations, or the panel members, please get in touch with those speakers directly, or us at the APAL office, and we can put you in touch. Thanks Ross, Craig, Jeremy, Justin, Nathan, Ian, Jeremy and Brent for taking the time to come and join us and sharing your insights in the panel. And thanks also to the FLAs and the growers, and to Larissa Vaughan, who's in the background here making sure everything runs very smoothly. You can find today's presentation slides and videos in the Future Orchards Library on the APAL website. A recording will be available in a few days. We'd like to thank you all for participating. We'll be conducting a short evaluation at the end as you exit the session, and we appreciate you taking a few minutes to complete it, because your feedback helps guide our future activities. The Future Orchards program is an APAL funded is an APEL project delivered in partnership with Ag First and is funded by Hort Innovation using the apple and pear industry R&D levy and contributions from the Australian government. We'd also like to share with you opportunities through scholarships that are being funded by Hort Innovation through the Women and Leadership Australia program that will provide support for 3 women to undergo the Leading Edge program and 2 women to complete the Executive Ready program. Applications for this close on the 9th of October. And if you would like to know more about this, please visit the Women in Leadership site or contact Bianca Cairns at Hort Innovation. Sorry. In the meantime, stay safe and we look forward to seeing you at the next event.